medicine ball drills, do's and don'ts when you're coaching with your athletes, especially younger athletes. A lot of times we see the intent is there and they're trying to throw the ball as hard as possible, but the sequencing is off. One of the things I see a lot of is too much arms and not enough torso and hip, right? The whole point of doing any kind of rotational medicine ball exercise is to get the athlete to learn to use trunk rotation and or pelvic rotation, right? And we can do a bunch of different constraints to teach either one of those. Our hands have a lot of nerve endings in them, so it's very easy to overdo it with the arms, and that's great, especially if we're working an upper body plyometric with a medicine ball. But if the goal is purely trunk and rotation, there's so many others that we can do. One of the little techniques that I like to do is to build sequencing segment or constraint at a time. So teaching them to feel the difference between just using their arms, right, and then shoulder to shoulder, chin movement, and learning to build rhythm and stabilization from there. When we start isolating the pelvis, so we don't use too much hands, right, I have them hold the ball in their forearms, right, open hand drills, so that way we learn to rotate either our femurs or our pelvis, right, and learn to have that weight shift, right? If you can throw it hard without any hands, you're actually getting your hips through, especially that back hip and back leg. Then when you learn to throw the hands into it, you can get that whole kinetic sequencing. So check some of these videos out and see if some of these constraints can help your athletes clean up their
First drill you see here is taking the hands away. That's the first constraint, and just learning to use the torso and hips, and really down regulate the hands and up regulate the rest of the body. The next drill is a rhythm drill, and really what we want to think about is taking the hips away and focusing just on the torso, right? So we think using the chin as a marker, thinking shoulder to shoulder touches the chin, and then from here we can focus on adding intent to one direction or other. These ones you're seeing intent on the acceleration with the shoulder and rhythm on the load. The next one you'll see is intent on the load and then just a release or recoil on the acceleration. So chopping down and then recoiling, right? So knowing when and where to add speed and rhythm. Again, I like to kind of layer them and go back before we use the pelvis with the hands-free drill, right? So we can kind of upregulate the torso and shoulders before we switch to integrating just the lower half, right? So this one is more of a weight shift, so we're increasing more of the leg and femur involvement. We can do a leg kick, working on pelvic rotation, basically trying to work the stretch shortening cycle. And then from there we can add momentum in terms of the frontal plane, where we're doing a shuffle or step behind step, and really learning to build, gather, and build up in that frontal plane. And then the last one is learning how to use the ground. So I like using a box or a hop, so that way you have to quickly redirect that downward force into rotation. Give these a try.